A very good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. On behalf of India International Center, I extend indeed a very warm welcome to all of you to this book discussion program on Maya, Modi, Azad, Dalit Politics in the Time of Hindutva, authored by Professor Sudha and Dr. Sajjan Kumar. We have a very distinguished panel to discuss this book. We have with us Sri Suhas Borker, Editor Citizens First TV and Trustee India International Center, who's going to moderate this session. We have with us Sri Sudheendra Kulkarni, columnist and aide to former Prime Minister Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Professor Surinder Singh Jodhka, Professor Center for the Study of Social System, JNU. Ms. Smita Gupta, former associate editor, senior journalist. And the architects of this book, Professor Sudha, political scientist, columnist, and professional retired of political science at the Center for Political Studies and former rector at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. And Dr. Sajjan Kumar, who is a researcher, political scientist, fellow Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and who has co-authored this. With this brief introduction, may I request Mr. Borker to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Okay. So good evening, all of you. I think the Chief Librarian, Dr. Munshi, has made my task much easier by introducing the panel. So I needn't do that. So we'll immediately start off by asking Dr. Sudha to, yeah, wherever you want, there or here? Yeah.
Firstly, I'd like to thank the IIC and particularly Mr. Suhas Borker for giving us this opportunity to present our book, this platform for discussion on the book. We are very grateful to them, and a warm welcome to lots of friends and colleagues, students whom I see here today. I'm going to take just a few minutes because there are two authors, and I think we should give plenty of time to the panelists. To say a few words on the book, while much has been written on Dalit politics in the 1990s, our book traces the changed Dalit landscape in the 2000s, why and how the Dalit discourse has responded to changing socio-political context in the last one decade and in the context of right-wing hegemony in particular. We examine three scenarios, rapidly shifting scenarios in which the nature of the Dalit crisis is very clearly reflected. The decline of the BSP under Mayawati and identity politics, the shift of a considerable section towards the BJP and its refined subaltern Hindutva under Narendra Modi, and the rise of a new leader, Chandrasekhar Azad, in Western UP, and what this means for the Dalit movement in UP and in North India. It is this triangular contestation and intersectionalities between Maya, Modi, and Azad, and the possibilities it presents that places our narrative within the larger shifts that are taking place in Indian politics in the 2000s. I will just present a few arguments of the book. A central concern is, of course, the existential crisis facing the BSP and the reasons for the decline of a once strong party. While undoubtedly immediate failures are there, which are very well known and which we do document, corruption between 2007 and 2012, a lot of defection and expulsion of senior members from the BSP, organizational decline of the party, lack of any alternate ideology after the perceived failure of Sajjan, the lackluster campaign by Mayawati in recent years, and so on. But far more important for us are the longer-term overarching changes that have taken place in the UP polity and which are then reflected within the Dalit community. The impact of globalization was late in UP due to a decade of identity politics and short-lived governments. But weakening of identity politics by the 2000s led to a shift from the desire for social justice to heightened economic aspiration for material advancement. But the BSP was not meant to be and is not a party equipped for providing an alternative economic agenda to attend to the problems of economic deprivation in the conventional sense for Dalits. By the time Mayawati attempted her Sarvajan experiment, she raised more expectations among Dalits than could be fulfilled in 5 years. Consequently, our work points to a new relationship between caste, development, and electoral politics that helps explain, we feel, the decline of the BSP, the BJP's successful outreach to a section of Dalits, and the emergence of Dalit organizations such as the Bhim Army and many others. But equally important are certain inherent long-term weaknesses within the Dalit movement in UP, which have come to the fore today. Bahujan identity and consciousness formulated by Kanchiram did not penetrate into all the subcastes where Dalits are concerned. It merely largely influenced the Chamar Jatavs, the better off dominant section in Western UP. The smaller marginalized subcastes retained their own subcaste identities, creating today caste class divisions. So today, rather than identity, social justice, cultural aspirations, economic anxieties are the driving forces creating fragmentation into the pro-BSP or Ambedkarite and the pro-BJP or the Hindutvadi Dalits. We believe that the Dalit movement has entered a post-BSP phase, a development which need not be seen in a negative light, as much has been achieved. The BSP has in great measure fulfilled its original promise of providing Dalits identity and self-respect and contributed to the social deepening of democracy. What we are witnessing is the maturing of the Dalit movement in North India. Having obtained a measure of consciousness and self-confidence, a significant section now are in search of a political party or movement that can offer them economic betterment and inclusion in the larger Hindu identity. An important legacy also is, of course, Dalit assertion, which remains strong and which underlies, there are multiple forms of assertion that the book talks about, the Bhim Army being only the best known. Two other issues that I would like to briefly mention is that we examine in these issues the interface between a declining Dalit movement and a rising Hindutva, which we argue is both layered and complex. Why do Dalits protest strongly against upper caste atrocities, yet within a few months later support the BJP in the next election? We agree that the BJP, that the economic benefits offered by the BJP to Labhartis, as they are called, has created a successful new politics of redistribution. But ground reality shows through our field work that Dalits are, have long preferred to vote for the party that protects them and looks after their interests, which today they believe is the BJP. Also, they associate atrocities with the upper caste and not the BJP, arguing that this has always happened and was perhaps even more under the SP. So there is respect for Bhenji as a tall leader. AZAD is called in when atrocities take place, but the vote is cast ultimately for the BJP. Does this support reflect conversion of Dalits to Hindutva ideology? We are witnessing both tactical and ideological attraction towards the BJP. For groups who alternate between one party to another from one election to the other, the support is merely tactical. But if particular subgroups like the Valmikis vote for the BJP in large numbers over a number of elections, the support can be construed as becoming ideological. Reversals back and forth are possible, but do not seem likely in the near future. Hinduization and the fascination of being a Hindu has taken deep roots in Indian society. Today, it's a more open societal and political project reflected in the electoral process. Even if the BJP were to lose state power, there would be no social reversal. These are some of the major arguments. The impact of this, which we see largely in terms of fragmentation and the future of the BSP, I leave to Sajjan.
Thank you. I see Suhas, Borker sir, the panelist, and our friends. Adding up to what Professor Pai just said, one thing about the approach and method in the book. Before going there, we had the questions which were already floating there, because many discussions were there. How do we construe the fragmentation of Dalit discourse? Much churning was happening within the once consolidated, not that consolidated, but relatively consolidated emergence of an Ambedkarite Dalit discourse in Hindi heartland since late 80s. and the fragmentation within Ambedkarite framework, then ideological fragmentation. So one thing, we had an option about the approach, and we took what Professor Jodhka has popularly called the text view and the field view. So we decided to employ the field view, and that is what we call also in political sciences epistemic realism. So trying to going to the ground with a set of questions and trying to theorize the ground from a bottom-up approach rather than going there with a pre-given, a priori theoretical framework. And fragmentation is one finding, and it's going to be a dominant fact about the Dalit discourse, that it's deeply fragmented, and it's going to be a very, not a static fragmentation, but a dynamic fragmentation. Now, with regard to the fragmentation, another question was that is it a crisis for democracy? Because ultimately the question is about the interplay between the identity and democracy. And when a static identity undergoes a fragmentation and multiple modes of fragmentation, should we treat, particularly when they constitute or are happening within the subaltern community, as a crisis to the democracy? Or should it be seen as a sign of deepening of democracy, the emergence of a aspirational, confident middle class among the subaltern community who is not willing to be bound to one party and one leader, and is willing to negotiate and bargain and have leverage with whatever party? So with that approach in mind, trying to find out what is the perspective on the ground, the first set of fragmentation that we found was within the Ambedkarite autonomous discourse, the Ambedkarite ideological discourse, which got prominence since late 80s and 1990s. Now within that, one thing is we find a very generational shift. So you see the emergence of a new Dalit millennials who are in their 25 to 40, that age bracket, quite angry, not just because they see the emergence of a counter ideology of Hindutva, but also they blame the existing custodian of the Ambedkarite ideology, particularly Mayawati, for abandoning the movement part of the party, BSP. And therefore, they are willing to take the mantle of the Ambedkarite ideology with a new set of agenda, and they are significant from a party like BSP in terms of their everydayness. So while the party like BSP has a long-term institutional sense, someone like Chandrasekhar Azad and fellow Ambedkarites who are quite millennials, they are impatient and more angry. So therefore, you also find one fragmentation is ideology remains the same, icons remain the same, but they blame each other for abandoning and not understanding the true course of how the discourse has to be unfolded. And that you see a generational crisis, but ideology remains the same. Another set of fragmentation, and that is within the Ambedkarite fragmentation, is a consolidated, pan-state consolidated discourse that used to be there since late 80s, 1990s, and until 2010. Now you find that it has gone from a pan-state consolidated Dalit discourse to a sub-regional, that is the local, and what in UP they call it Anchalik. So you have a different sort of leaders with a different set of agenda in Purvanchal, in Western UP, in Bundelkhand. And they are not willing to use the sub-regional card to offer themselves as a better votary of the Ambedkarite discourse. So that way you also find that now the sub-regional politics has also intersected the Dalit discourse. And the third is the multiple caste. You have Jatavs and Chamars on the one side, and you have the non-Jatav Chamars. There are 66 Dalit caste in UP, but primarily if you see the Pasis, Khatiks, Valmikis, etc., versus the Jatavs and Chamars, within that you see that there is also a kind of ideological shift. Now, why that shift is happening? One of the things we found within kind of Dalit discourse, that the question of secularism being posed to Hinduism and then expecting the subaltern community, OBCs and Dalits to choose secularism, misses one point, that there are multiple modes of religiosity among the subaltern community, and Hindutva not necessarily follows a ritualistic and Brahmanical religiosity. More often than not, it is willing to cater to the popular folk religiosity, which is having more resonance among the subaltern community. And that is popular religiosity. This is one. So this secular and religious framework is not something which is happening on the ground. Two, when you look at the Dalit discourse from an ideological frame and see the fragments as a moment of crisis for democracy, because the Dalit community is getting fragmented in terms of their political and cultural choices. One thing that also coming up from within the Dalit community, that once BSP fulfilled its prime aim of inculcating a sense of self-respect, thereafter is the emergence of a confident Dalit middle class, among them the millennials who are aspirational, and now BSP is not the best claimant of carrying forward the politics of aspiration, and therefore they are more pragmatic. Three, when we see that within Dalit discourse, as Professor Pai said, how do we see the play of ideology? One anecdote, and with that I'll end. We went to Saharanpur, and in Saharanpur there is a locality called Jatav Nagar, wholly constituted by the Jatav Dalits. There is a person who is the richest person, and they are into leather shoemaking profession. Nepal Singh, who has started from rags to riches. He is quite a richest person in Jatav Nagar. He shifted to BJP in 2014, while the entire Jatav Nagar was the bastion of BSP. Now, when we confronted Nepal Singh with the question that he is accused by the fellow Jatav as betraying the cause and ideology and the discourse, his response was that we have to see how the things are happening on the ground. And one of the things around the time of interview, Dayashankar Singh, a leader of BJP, has called names and some obscene remarks against Mayawati. When we pose that a party like BJP is considered Manuvadi, Brahmanical, and there are instances, his response was that this has happened, and the party has taken action against Dayashankar Singh. And around the same time, because it was built up to the UP 27 election, Azam Khan in Greater Noida, in addressing a meeting of Muslims, pointed to the statue of Dr. Ambedkar and said, do you know what is the meaning of the pointed finger of Dr. Ambedkar? It signifies that whatever land you can see, capture it, and this is going to happen. And then he says that Dr. Ambedkar insult cannot be lesser than Bahanji. Did BSP and others protest it? So that way you also see the social, subjective and objective perception, how a significant section of Dalits are having the everyday subjective perception with regard to the Muslims. And when I say Muslims, primarily the Pasmanda Muslims, the low caste Muslims. Because in their perspective, whenever you have a secular and social justice party, the primacy is either of one caste. If it's BSP, it has to be Jatav and Chamar and Muslims. If it is Samajwadi Party, it has to be Yadavs and Muslims. And whenever everyday tussles happen between a Dalit, because they live in the shared space with the Muslims, the maximum actors of the agents of the state, which is the police persons or the local, networking, always caters to the Muslims. So in everyday experience, this quest of Dalit-Muslim alliance is not something that majority of the Dalit on the ground witness in day-to-day life under the rule of social justice-centric party. And that is why when we see the Dalit discourse today, we are celebrating the fragmentation, because fragmentation is a sign of deepening of democracy within the Dalits. It's the sign of the emergence of a confident middle class who is not beholden to one party and one leader. And three, it is a sign that, like other privileged and better off communities who are habitual to shift to multiple parties, like a Brahmin in UP keeps on shifting from BSP to SP to BJP, Dalits are also willing to adopt the same confidence. Fragmentation is a sign of, and therefore rather than lamenting the fragmentation, we have explained it and in a way celebrated it. Thank you.
I'll just take a couple of minutes before I ask the panelists to come in. The interesting thing is that, when Madhu Dandapte passed away on the 12th of November 2005, we started this program at IIC called the State of Parliamentary Democracy. And three of them, Professor Jodhka, Sudha, and Smita, have been on that panel. So it's not out of design that this has been worked out. I just noticed it today that somehow this has happened. So we've been discussing parliamentary democracy, and today we are on to Maya, Modi and Azad. So Sajjan just talked about Nepal Singh, isn't it? Yeah. From the Jatav Nagar. You see, when both of them have gone through this minefield, I would call it a minefield actually, in UP. And you have, as Sudha Pai just pointed out, the decline of Mayawati, the shifting of the Dalits to BJP under Modi, and then the emergence of a new leader, Chandrasekhar Azad. Now, a couple of, I think it was about 1.5 months or 2 months ago, when we fixed this, that we'll have this thing, and then, availability, now we're getting out of that. We lost a couple of crores during the COVID. So we are getting out of that, and IIC is going full steam. So you don't get even a booking easily, So we had to wait to get this booking. So this room actually, because we wanted a wider one, because we expected a crowd, and that crowd is very much here. So when we were working on this, a couple of weeks or just a couple of days after that, then we had this bid on Azad's life, and it was quite a dastardly attack on this fellow. So then he was back on center page, and then this question was put to him, and I just want to flag that answer which he gave. And just a minute. Yeah. So the question, I think it's quite related with this, what's in these pages. Dalits are said to be increasingly voting for the BJP. So Azad replies, it is a misplaced analysis that Dalits are voting for the BJP. Why did they lose in West Bengal and Karnataka? The BJP is largely getting the votes from the people it is working for. So that Nepal Singh also fits in somewhere there. And then members of the Dalit community might be voting for them due to lack of awareness in society and some economic benefits, which Sajjan just mentioned, given by the government. The BJP has tried to buy support through these schemes. If the BJP is defeated in the future, it will be the Dalit community which would be defeating it. Now, after that, I would like to flag, I can get the book, see, which I think both of them have highlighted, and it's very much, I'll take you to a few lines from the epilogue. The BJP's ascendancy and the BSP's electoral decline paints a gloomy scenario for the latter in future, with its party organization having broken down. Now they're talking of the BSP. Its social base unraveled, its ideology no longer attractive to the electorate, including the Dalits, and whose leadership does not step out to mobilize as in the past. The BSP is a pale shadow of what was once a dominant Dalit party. Now the question which repeatedly comes up when you talk of the Dalit movement within UP is where on earth is Miss Mayawati? In fact, a journalist wrote a piece for the Gulf Times recently on where on earth is Miss Mayawati, and then the explanation given is that you see, you have that, which this dispensation is very cleverly using. You have the IT I mean, I'm not talking about information technology. I'm talking of income tax, and you have the ED, you know. So these instruments are used, and this poor lady then shuts up. You see, as soon as any election is announced, there is a move to some summons are issued to her, and then she goes underground. You know, I mean, she has two fortresses, one in Lucknow and one in Delhi. So she goes underground within that fortress. I don't know how you can do that, but she does it. Okay, so that's one. The third thing which I want to flag is that you see, I want to take you back to the suicide of Rohit Vemula. I had written that time a piece in the Hindu, and I just want to flag that the suicide of Rohit Vemula had exposed why attempts to co-opt Ambedkar as a Hindu reformer cannot succeed due to inherent ideological contradictions. The challenge posed, now this is in the context of Hyderabad, the challenge posed by the Ambedkar Students Association at the Hyderabad Central University to the Brahminical hegemony of Hindutva represented by ABVP is in the very logic of the Dalit political vision. So I think I've done enough at the moment. So I'll ask Professor Jodhka to come. Yeah, please.
Have around 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for asking me to be on this panel. I obviously feel honored to be here, and having read the book, congratulations for writing such an accessible and, as Sajjan said, view from the field. And a lot of it has been said as it is presented to them. And I think that's what makes it possible for us to read the book the way we wish to read, and perhaps draw inferences which are not necessarily what the inferences are in some sense drawn by the authors themselves. So I think that's what makes field-based accounts richer and more useful. I'm not a political scientist, so I'm perhaps not the right person, nor am I a political commentator. There are very senior people sitting here who have been looking at politics very closely. I don't look at politics that way. I mean, I do study political processes because they are also social processes. I also don't work on UP. I think UP is, if you look at the population of UP, I think it's larger than the population of Russia. So UP is not a small state. UP is a big country, very big country. Perhaps many countries would fit in UP, or UP have population perhaps equal to 20 different countries or more. So UP is not very easy to, in some sense, comment on. And I've never worked on UP except having done some work on Kashiram, but not really in context of UP, but more in context of his own personal politics. But I do work on caste, I do work on caste and politics, and it is from that context as a sociologist that I would try to kind of say a few things, my own reflections, and what do I get out of this book, and why this book should be taken seriously and should be read. And these are things that need to be talked about much more. Authors have their own conclusions. I think you can already see tensions within what they have presented to us. I think there are multiple possibilities. Some of them have been stated very sharply, like Professor Pai said, this cultural shift is not going to go away. This may not really be the case. I think Sajjan seems to be suggesting something else when he's talking about dynamic fragmentation. And I think that's a very, very interesting term. And that, in some sense, leaves lots of possibilities open. And that's where I would try to kind of comment, in some sense, on. Though they have already introduced the book, I think it's important to kind of give you my own reading of the book. Broadly speaking, there are three different, in some sense, themes in the book or sections of the book. First is, even though it is talking about Dalit politics, it's very clearly divided into these three parts. First is broadly speaking, decline of BSP, Mayawati's politics, and Mayawati is at the center there, a particular kind of Dalit politics, and it declines because of partly perhaps its successes, institutionalization. It had delivered a lot that it needed to deliver, and then for going further, it did not have any kind of language or agenda or will, and that's why it in some sense gets institutionalized, and corruption creeps in a very systematic manner. So in some sense, BSP becomes very mainstream political party. 3 crore is the rate for a seat if you want to contest MP, and that you have to give kind of upfront if you want to be considered for a seat to BSP, which is not very promising kind of thing. And apart from that, you could not meet Mayawati unless you kind of took some gift for her. So corruption in some sense became institutionalized, which I think also is some kind of mainstreaming of BSP, and that's why BSP declines in there are many other things. I think second section of the book is rise of BJP and how and why Dalits begin to vote for BJP. I think that's a very interesting and very important part of the book, and where they're talking about several things, internal fragmentation within the Dalit politics, which has already been there, which was always there, but I think they are kind of overemphasizing that or saying that it becomes much more obvious. And then there are two different processes which again have been repeatedly mentioned. One is an ideological process where Dalits are incorporated into the larger Hindutva ideological cultural process, but more importantly or equally importantly is the manner in which Mr. Modi and BJP is able to deliver developmental goods, Labharthi, like the Dalits are in some sense getting more from BJP than they perhaps got during BSP's rule. So it's BSP plus. In some sense, BSP was doing many things for Dalits, but it was also talking about Dalit dignity in a very different manner. BJP also gives them dignity by bringing them into Hindutva fold. It also gives them developmental goods in terms of loans for housing, other kinds of developmental benefits. This is also revival of BJP. In some sense, it's a larger process, and Dalits are part of that revival in UP. And the third, I think, which is equally important, is that Dalit politics has not gone away, right? Even though people are voting for Hindutva, again, this has been underlined by both of them. And you have the emergence of a new kind of AZAD politics. I think AZAD should not just be referring to Chandrasekhar Azad. Azad should also refer to a different kind of Azad politics. Azad also in some sense assertion of your own autonomy, and there are different kinds of Azadi, and I think that makes much more sense than to refer to Azad, and that's what the third section refers to, that you have new kind of autonomous Dalit politics, which is not necessarily looking for electoral successes, which is not necessarily looking for Dalit identity, but it is looking for something else. Azadi is much more than just being a Dalit. And I think this is what is kind of broadly speaking scope of the politics, and it also in some sense concludes that BSP is now done, right? There's very little chance of BSP's revival in the manner in which BSP in some sense is known under Mayawati and stuff like that. So my final section, I'll speak for around less than 10 minutes hopefully, is how do I see these processes. As a sociologist, I think there is much more in this book which one can perhaps use to develop and build and perhaps also reflect, and some of them are also critical comments. And there is a general kind of tendency in social sciences, also in political commentaries, which in some sense invokes categories, and those categories have their own history. And if you kind of open up those categories, again, one sees many things. For example, Dalit, the word Dalit, what do we mean by Dalit? So the word Dalit has been used in this discussion, in this book, or in general public discourse, political discourse. We think of Dalit as a caste category, that there is a caste like Brahmin, there is a caste, Rajputs are a caste, Dalit are a caste, right? Which is actually not the case. Dalit, if you look at slightly closely, Dalit is not a caste category at all. Dalit is a political construct. And as a political construct, the word Dalit in some sense historically emerges only when you have a kind of new ways through which ex-untouchable communities, or now called as scheduled castes, begin to see themselves as victims of a particular kind of order and think collectively, think together. So I think in sociology we have this word called sui generis. Sui generis is something out there. So I think Dalit is not something which is out there. Dalit is not a category which should be objectified. I think Dalit is a process which is also a process of mobilization, conscientization, politicization, but also not something with which every Dalit agrees. Kashiram had complete disdain for the word Dalit. Very few people know about it. He publicly said that we are not Dalits. That's why he used the word Bahujan. And I have written a paper on political agency of the Dalits and making of the Dalit political agency. We are focused on Kashiram and his own accounts and how he publicly wanted to say that we want to be Sher, we want to be lions, we want to rule the country. And if you call yourself Dalit, you can never be the ruler. That's why for him, the term was an abuse. And lots of Dalits, by the way, in UP, in Punjab, I have personally encountered, if you use the word Dalit, they get angry, right? So Dalit is not a caste category. I think that's something which is important when I develop some other points. Likewise, the word Jati or subcaste as it is used, they are also quite fluid. You know, say categories like Jatavs, Chamars, Valmikis. When do Valmikis become Valmikis? Right? Valmikis were Lal Begs. You know, there's work of anthropologists on this. Valmikis were much closer to the scavenging communities of North India, Punjab, UP. They were much closer to Islam. It is only in the early 20th century, late 19th century that they turned into Hindus. And there is this Hindu Mahasabha very systematically, actively works with scavenging communities, and they had their own local names. And when they come to cities, they become Valmikis, so there's a particular identity given to them, and which is not very long ago. And this whole politics of numbers is something about which Gandhi was also very anxious. He wanted to make SCs or Dalits as Hindus, and that's why he was fighting with Ambedkar. So I think if one was to kind of open up this also in some sense then tells us that why is it that Valmikis are closer to Hindutva politics. They've historically in the last 100 years, their history has been very different. Jatav history is very different. So when you look at the dynamics of identity politics, fragmented identity politics, these are going to be Jati specific, and the manner in which they have been collectively mobilized or collectively produced. I'm using the word produced and constructed rather than they're being in terms of sui generis kind of way. There is also a moment in history when, as again Professor Pai has already pointed to, Professor Jagpal Singh, with whom, who is a political scientist at IGNOU, he once raised this question: can a Dalit community or SC community be a dominant caste in the village? Now this is a very important process, you know, when Jatavs or Chamars begin to behave like a dominant caste, and they actually became very, very influential in some areas. In UP, Dalits or Chamars particularly have had land, agricultural land, and many of the upwardly mobile dominant castes have moved out, and they become the local dominant caste. And what then it does to their own identity as Dalits? They don't see themselves as Dalits. I think Machuetti's work, which says that, you know, they don't see themselves as Dalits at all. They say, no, we are not Dalits. Hum samaj sevak hain, hum social worker hain. So I think their identity undergoes complete change, and BSP in some sense also plays that role. So caste is a relational process. That is my third point. Caste is a relational process. And if we have to look at political process somewhere or the other, we also need to look at these underlying relational structures, point that I was just making. What if scheduled caste community begins to behave like a dominant community in the local section? It cannot just behave like that. One is Mayawati is in power, but then the rural is changing very significantly, very rapidly. Many parts of India, the erstwhile rural dominant caste groups have all moved out, and the village has been left to lower OBCs and Dalits. So there the dynamics undergo change. So there's a whole political economy of caste relations, and relational structures, which also perhaps, when we are talking about sub-regional processes, sub-regionally UP is very, very diverse. Eastern UP's political economy, Eastern UP's rural dynamics, urban dynamics, its cropping structure, its green revolution, its agriculture, they are completely different from Western UP. Likewise, there are other sub-regions. As much as I know of UP, I don't know much, but I think the regional realities historically, urban processes historically significantly vary, and that is connected to other kind of processes as well. And we need to, in some sense, also look at electoral processes by connecting them to these kinds of, underlying structures of relationships where there are lots of negotiations happening. So these regional identities and sub-regionalization is not something that surprises me. We should recognize the fact that BSP was not a party that came from below. BSP actually came from office. BSP was a party of quota middle-class Dalits, people who had benefited from reservations, became officers. Kashiram is the best example of that. He's a Punjabi, Sikh, Ramdasiya, born in Ropar district, goes to Pune, and there he is treated as a lamba choda Punjabi. Nobody thinks he's a Dalit, but then suddenly he gets provoked when somebody is fired because he protests against Ambedkar's birth anniversary not being a holiday. And then he says, I'm a scheduled caste, he's a scheduled caste, we are together. So this whole notion of being scheduled caste, its spatial location is office. And I think that office also has its own historicity. BAMSEF was the first organization that precedes BSP, and paying back is a very, very important point that Kashiram makes. So he was able to mobilize all these neo-middle class, Dalit, elite, or whatever you like to call them, at the pan-Indian level. And this pan-Indian itself is a product of post-independent histories. By 70s, by 80s, you have a kind of Dalit middle class which is emerging at the national level, and that's how BSP becomes a possibility. And this BSP becomes possibility through these Babu activists. And if you look at the social profile of people who join BSP, all of them are from BAMSEF, and then they are able to mobilize. So BSP is an urban party. BSP is an office party, a kind of neo-Dalit elite party, and they, in some sense, go back to Ambedkar, mobilize in different ways, and Kashiram was extremely successful. And that office has changed. I mean, we also need to look at that. I mean, we know public sector employment has changed. Neoliberal policies have, in some sense, those options are no longer there with young Dalits, and the Sarkari, in some sense, economy has changed, but also along with that, neoliberal aspirations are of very different kind, and these neoliberal aspirations come as much as from mobile phones and what you read, and everyone is educated. Everyone goes to school today. I mean, all Dalit kids go to school. 90% plus Dalit kids also go to schools, and there is some minimal education. So the second point on my reflections, I'll take another 3-4 minutes, can I? Okay, yeah, I'll do it faster, is about the literature on caste and democracy. I think there's something very interesting in this book, and which in some sense immediately came to my mind. A long time back, Rudolph had done some work on caste entering Indian politics. Following that, Rajini Kothari said that when caste enters democratic politics, it suppose it also happens. Democracy politics also enters caste. So what it does is that caste also gets democratized internally, and that has actually happened. So we have another book, James Manner and myself, where we disagree partly with this formulation, because castes have become internally democratic because these are competitive spaces. But hierarchies persist. Externally, caste inequalities still process. So there are associational processes. And this democratization of caste from internal also has lots of implications for the way we think about caste and politics. Everyone votes for everyone, right? You look at CSS census, we say 70% versus 30%, 40% versus 90%. So there's no 100% voting of any community for any single party. So what am I trying to say? That there is also a process of individualization within the politics. Within one family, husband would be voting for one person, wife would be voting for another person. They had agreed, but in the voting booth, they changed their mind. So I think this is something that we never take into consideration, and we need to invent language which can talk about it. And this is something that. So my final point is that we must recognize that that Dalit politics inherently, if we are talk about this AZAD movement is also in some sense a moment when citizenship comes to the foreground. The questions of citizenship. I said right from day one, the idea of Dalitness is to get rid of caste. You can't think of Dalitness without annihilation simultaneously. Caste, Dalit politics cannot be identity politics in the long run. Dalit politics has to be a politics of annihilation. And that's where I'm not as cynical as Professor Pai is. The possibilities exist because it would be very hard, and I think Borker was trying to point to that, it would be very hard for BJP to accommodate Dalit aspirations within its own imagination of Hindutva and its own imagination of a kind of Hindu culture. And that is not something which creates space for Dalit. It might accommodate them temporarily. It might make them Labharthi. Labharthi is a humiliating term. Nobody would want to be a Labharthi. If you are Azad, you want to be a citizen. You want to have your rights. You want these things to be given to you as a citizen, not as a Labharthi. Labharthi insults. Labharthi humiliates. It creates structures of dependency. And I think BJP's accommodation of Dalit is within the structures of dependency. And that's why I don't think this alliance will last for very long. I'm not predicting or anything. I'm just trying to, maybe it's a wishful thinking on some or the other. But I think one should also think of those politics. Politics is politics. Politics is not a static thing. Politics is always dynamic. It is always open. And that's what makes it so wonderful. That's what it engages us so much and creates passions in all of us. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking longer time.
So, very much for that the vibrancy you have brought in to our discussion. Now over to you, Smita.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm privileged and honored. Thank you, Sudha. I think this book, Maya Modi, AZAD Dalit Politics in the Time of Hindutva, by Sudha Pai and Sajjan Kumar, is a very timely addition to our understanding of contemporary Uttar Pradesh politics. The Congress remains in decline. The principal opposition party, the Samajwadi Party, is still a long distance from returning to power with or without friends. And at a time when the Dalit movement in the country, fragmented as it is into different sorts of mobilizations, from ferment on college campuses in Telangana to legal attempts to secure land rights in Gujarat, is growing steadily, it makes sense to focus on Uttar Pradesh, home to the Bahujan Samaj Party, the most successful Dalit party in the country historically. The book, as we know, maps the rise and fall of Mayawati's BSP, which in its heyday changed both the politics and society in the state. If it did not turn the pyramid upside down, as BSP founder Kanshiram had dreamt, it succeeded in going a fairly long way. The book then explains in detail how the entry of Narendra Modi in national politics and the introduction of a subaltern Hindutva saw a substantial section of Dalits, especially, I won't use the word Dalit, scheduled castes, especially among the non-Jatavs, overlooking the BJP's essential upper caste mindset and moving to that party. Finally, it focuses on a range of new Dalit parties, the most significant being Chandrasekhar Azad's Bhim Army. Now, there is a wealth of detail in the book, the result of meticulous research by the authors, and the insights in the book will interest both the lay reader and those more familiar with the subject of Dalit politics. It's not that I have any difference, I disagree with any of the facts that have been put, but I think I have a slightly different point of view of the Mayawati period. The story of the decline of the BSP is a cautionary tale as told in this book. Its huge success in creating self-respect, identity, and a safe space for Dalits. But in the decline of the party, we see the limitations of electoral politics, of Sarvajan politics. In the BSP's Sajjan message, the Brahmins saw a chance of controlling power again, of regaining power. But when the BSP won a decisive victory in 2007, despite the disproportionate number of upper castes included in government, it was not enough. For them, it was a stepping stone to regaining power, not a way of sharing power. The gap between the largely uneducated or poorly educated Jatavs, those who voted blindly for Mayawati, some of whom still do, because, as they say, hamari ginti sirf wahan hoti hai. And the Brahmins, accustomed to creating public opinion and ruling the roost, was too big. So though what was unthinkable in a UP village, say, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, scheduled castes and upper castes such as Brahmins sitting at the same level, perhaps on adjoining chairs, is possible today, as the Brahmin has successfully publicly overcome his revulsion to having a conversation on some terms of equality, he still cannot come to terms with sharing power. As a journalist, I covered that period extensively. For me, one of the most enduring images of the 2012 assembly elections that Mayawati lost was from my travels in the run-up to poll day in western Uttar Pradesh. In a village that I had stopped at, there appeared to be very few people. I finally found a few teenagers hiding, cowering in a dank tenement. The boys were all Jatavs, and when I asked them why they were hiding, they said the word was out. The then Chief Minister Mayawati was going to lose the elections, and then those higher up on the caste ladder would take their revenge on her caste fellows, the Jatavs. Their expressions of terror have stayed with me to this day. It brought home very powerfully what 5 years of Mayawati in power had meant for the Dalits, for the scheduled castes, not just the Jatavs, as though this was not her first stint as Chief Minister. It was the first time her party had won an absolute majority. So even though the focus during those elections was on the corruption during her reign, and true as that was, it was also a 5-year period during which Dalits felt safe when their complaints were registered at police stations, and women of all caste groups and classes, as well as those from minority communities, felt safe. Today, the BJP makes a big deal about how Yogi Adityanath has cracked down on lawbreakers and how women feel so safe that they can walk alone even at midnight. Last year, during the assembly polls, when I posed this question to some Muslims, they answered me with a counter question. Law and order for whom? It was also a period during which there was a great deal of progress. I'm talking about the Mayawati period. Great deal of progress on the governance front with the launch of many infrastructure projects that came to fruition later and which have been detailed in the book under discussion. The reason Mayawati lost those elections was not as much because she had allowed corruption to flourish as because the OBCs and the upper castes had realized that the criminal elements among them would no longer be permitted a free run. Law and order was the best during her time and the most fair, I would say. And that if a scheduled caste person filed a case under what is known in short as the Dalit Atrocity Act, action would be taken. They also did not like that Mayawati now expected everyone, even in the villages, to pay for electricity they were using. I was myself witness in Eastern UP to an electricity department official sitting all day in a village to collect unpaid dues. And finally, as Chief Minister, Mayawati increased the daily wages for farm labor, who were largely from the lower caste, to bring it on par with Narega wages. Most landlords were upper caste, and they took umbrage at this. An upper caste CM who insisted that villagers pay electricity bills and increase farm wages would be described as progressive by both right-wing and left-wing lobbies. But not Mayawati. The parks dedicated to Dalit icons, of course, were the last straw for those who had run the administration and controlled the system for centuries. It wasn't the money spent on the statues as the affront of Dalit heroes towering over a landscape where they had ruled for centuries. No marks were given for Mayawati's attempt to put in place the belief that a more equitable system could be created. the point I'm making is that when people talk about a party losing an election, any party, because of poor governance, there is always need to lengthen that question and ask, poor governance for whom? People vote because they feel good about a particular party or they feel bad about a particular party. So all of us have different demands, different desires. For me, the most interesting part of this book is the analysis of how and why a significant section of the Dalit vote has moved from the BSP to the BJP. Under Narendra Modi, an increasing percentage of Dalit subcastes, the book suggests, has shifted in Uttar Pradesh over the 2014, 2017, 2019, and 2022 elections. Now, the question is whether this is a temporary and tactical decision on the part of a section of these scheduled castes in the wake of the decline of the BSP, or does it reflect an ideological cultural conversion to saffronization? I would say that if the situation changes, I don't think these people will necessarily remain with the BJP, because even though the BJP has used cultural motives to attract these communities, so in UP, for instance, the BJP has targeted 3 non-Jatav SC groups, the Pasis, the Musahars, and the Nishads, linking them with the Ramayana. It has worked for the moment, but then there are other factors as well. The book also refers to data from police stations across UP, showing that of 605 communal incidents in UP in the 10 weeks beginning with the Lok Sabha results of 2014, 68 or every 9th incident saw clashes between Dalits and Muslims in rural areas. 48 of those incidents, over 70%, took place in and around 12 assembly constituencies where by-elections were due. These clashes, the book says, signaled a fracture in the BSP's once strong alliance between Dalits and Muslims. And local BJP leaders and units emerged as protectors of the Dalits. However, what the book does not say is that most of these clashes were actually engineered by members of the RSS family so that they could later play savior, create a wedge, and lure away the Dalit vote. Indeed, the BJP has played this game in other constituencies too. If any scheduled caste or OBC group was known to vote along with local Muslims in a particular area, it has been known right across the state to engineer clashes, to create differences and split the vote. And this is not just my impression, this was confirmed to me by some senior police officers. The third element, of course, is that of the Labharti, and I agree with earlier speakers that it is a kind of demeaning kind of word. And it is not that it has gone unnoticed. Last year in the 2022 elections, I remember an old lady belonging to the Baghel community telling me that while they were happy that they were getting all these free rations and so on, she said, but what is happening to our young men? They are sitting around drinking, taking nasha kar rahe hain. This is the age at which they should be getting jobs. It's much easier to give rations than to actually create employment. So it's not that people are not aware, but people, obviously, why should you not take the free rations? But it's not that people even at the lowest and most uneducated levels don't realize that these rations are actually a substitute for doing something which is far more difficult, actually creating employment. Okay, then I'll just, I had just one more point which I thought I should touch on, and that's a fragmentation question that Sajjan Kumar raised. I don't see it as, that fragmentation has happened, fragmentation of Dalit vote, that is a fact. But I don't see it necessarily as a positive, occurrence. And I feel that this is what the BJP wants. They want the scheduled caste to be fragmented. They don't want a scheduled caste Muslim alliance, because these are things that would come in the way of their, so I feel it's been engineered. It's another matter, you can look at it in a different way and say that, all of us, we shouldn't be bound by our sort of tribal ties or group, sentiment. But I do think that this is part of the BJP's game plan, because we have to face it, the BJP works harder than any other political party. It works 24/7. It's constantly inventive, in the way it's created these new cultural icons. It's created this whole thing, Wadla Bharti, all that, nobody can deny that. But I don't see it as a positive, happening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, Kulkarni Sahab, you have the floor.
Namaste to all of you, and I thank Professor Sudhaji, Sajjan Kumar for inviting me to this event. My hearty congratulations to both of you for writing a book. That's truly, as was pointed out, very rich in facts, information, and insightful. So anyone who wants to know Dalit politics, not only in Uttar Pradesh, even though this book is about Uttar Pradesh, anyone who wants to know about Dalit politics in India would benefit it by this. So congratulations. I would like to make 5 points, and I'll begin by saying that the one-line summary of this book is that the story of Dalit politics, and I agree with Professor Jodhka that this very term Dalit is a political construct. It's a very recent construct. It wasn't there even in Ambedkar's time, and you can hardly find the word Dalit in Ambedkar's voluminous writings. So the one-line summary is that Dalit politics, this book has shown, is a story of failure and bankruptcy. And Dalit politics, in the sense of separate Dalit power that will bring political power to the Dalit community, it was bound to fail, it was doomed to fail. No section-specific political party in India can govern an India that is so diverse. So, what has defeated BSP? It is the diversity of India. And the same diversity, friends, will also defeat the BJP someday. At the beginning of part 1 of your book, you say that the BSP's transformation from Bahujan to Sarvjan was an experiment in building a rainbow party with a Dalit core. Rainbow party with a Dalit core. It can never succeed. In fact, no political party that wishes to become a rainbow party but with one section as a core even the Hindu as a core will not succeed. What can succeed in India and what can really bring progress and prosperity for all, and what can strengthen democracy, is a rainbow party with Indian people at its core, with the nation as at its core, not Dalit as its core, Muslim as its core, Hindu as its core, or this caste or that caste. These experiments are bound to fail, and BSP has failed. And I'm saying, friends, that even the BJP's current triumphant run is going to run its course unless it becomes the only party in India's history, India's modern political history, that truly represented the nation as a whole was the Congress. So a party that wishes to do good to the country has to be sarva-vyapi, sarva-sparshi. It must touch every section of society. It must care for every section of society. And friends, even though this book has not gone into what I'm going to say, this failure started with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself. That is, the idea to construct a separate political power that can make the Dalits or the scheduled castes or the depressed classes as some kind of a separate political power. It started with Ambedkar himself. He founded the All India Scheduled Caste Federation. Didn't succeed. At the very fag end of his life, in September 1956, he announced the formation of the Republican Party of India, RPI, which was not really founded in his lifetime. It was founded after his passing away. But what is the history of RPI? RPI is also a failed party. And nothing illustrates the failure of RPI better than the fact that the leader of RPI is today a minister in Modi's government, Ramdas Athawale. So, Dalit political separatism will not work. Dalit social separatism will not work. So, the authors have quoted me in this book, and on page 135, I've said something which I would like to read out. Dalit politics under the BSP has run its course, and its obituary can be written. This reflects the severe limitations of identity politics in India. While Ambedkar will continue to remain an icon, as there is a desire for social justice and equality, which is certainly represented, there is little room for Ambedkarite politics of the BSP variety or any other variety. Dalit assertion and discourse on the ground will continue as there is aspiration among Dalits for a better life, which should be welcomed. But for Dalit politics as a separate and successful politics, there is no future. Now, my second point, friends, and this is about Dalit politics as a vehicle for annihilation of caste. Here again, there is very little critical scrutiny of Ambedkar. In fact, the one leader in modern history who remains immune to critical study it is Ambedkar. Nobody wants to criticize Ambedkar. But what has been the history ever since he wrote about annihilation of castes? Have castes been annihilated? Has even Dalit politics annihilated castes? The book states that there are 61 castes among scheduled castes themselves. None of these castes, not even the Jatavs, would like to give up their caste identity. And there are hundreds of castes, what are called scheduled castes, which again is a recent construct. They don't want to dissolve their identity, either in the wider Dalit identity or even in Hindu identity. They may like to be Hindu, but they don't want to give up their caste. So it's not annihilation of caste. Now there's a very interesting point made in this book when they talk to Gayacharan Dinkar, a close associate of Mayawati. Now he says that what we are aspiring and what we are working towards is not annihilation of caste. A very candid confession by a leader of an Ambedkarite party. We are not working towards annihilation of caste, we are working towards equalization of caste. So it means that what can work and what should be pursued in India is Sabjati Saman, Sabjati Mahan, not annihilation of jatis. I mean, maybe over the next few centuries, maybe jatis might disappear in the natural course of social evolution. But any political construct wanting to annihilate caste will not work, has not worked. Now, my third point, friends, is that the failure of Dalit politics has also had a very positive impact on Indian democracy and Indian society. It may have failed, but in its very failure, it has done something very good to Indian society and democracy. And that is two positive outcomes. First, Dalit assertion in the political sphere and some degree of success, it has enhanced and catalyzed self-pride, self-respect, and a demand for social justice and equality, which must be welcomed, especially in a deeply hierarchical and unfair society that India is and that Hindu society is. So this assertion, friends, in my view, is a big boost to social progress and progress of democracy. Because our democracy must give fair space to all people of all castes, all tribes, and all communities, including religious minorities, which is not happening today. The second way in which it has had a good impact is that Dalit assertion, Dalit movements, and the degree of success that Dalit politics has had so far, it has made the rest of Indian society, especially the Hindu society, sensitive to the pain, suffering, injustice that Dalit communities have faced and are continuing to face. So this new sensitivity in Hindu society is also to be welcomed. And I'm happy that this book has recognized the fact that even the RSS has woken up to this reality. Balasaheb Devaras, the third Sarsang Chalak of the RSS, in a very important speech which has been flagged in your book, he said, Asprishata ek samajik paap hai. Untouchability is a social sin. But this is something, friends, many enlightened social leaders, social reformers down the ages have said this. Beginning with Bhakti saints, Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave, Narayan Guru. So the point I am making is that the Hindu society is not some static society that is inherently oppressive and that cannot change. Hindu society can change, Hindu society is changing, but it must change even more. My fourth point, that in this book, after Maya comes Modi. Now actually, Narendra Modi's contribution to Dalit assertion is limited. Perhaps the only thing, the two things that he has done, he's built big memorials which are appreciated by the Dalit community. Two such very grand memorials are in the national capital itself. In Mumbai, where I come from, Babasaheb Ambedkar's Samadhi is going to become a big memorial. The London property has been turned into a memorial. All these, this is one aspect of what Modi has done. The second has already been referred to, that is Labharthi. But it's not Modi who has taken the Dalit communities or significant sections of the Dalit communities closer to the BJP. It's not Modi. It is the Sangh Parivar, it is the RSS. RSS has been working. Various other organizations of the Sangh Parivar have been working for decades, day after day, in villages, in slum communities, to bring some kind of a integration, what they call samarasta, samajik samarasta. Samajik nyay is one thing, but along with samajik nyay, samajik samarasta. Now this also began much, much earlier, and there is a brief reference to this in this book. Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay, in the 1960s, he understood that the Bharatiya Janasangh, the previous avatar of the BJP, it cannot remain an ideological party. It must become an integrationist party. It must reach out to more and more sections of Indian society. So it began then. And there's a very good book by an American scholar, Craig Baxter, who wrote a book in 1960s, how the Janasangh is transforming itself from an ideological party to an integrationist party. And that process has continued unstoppably till now. My last point, friends, is about my last point is about Hinduization. And this is where I have some differences with the authors, because again and again in this book, this term appears that Dalits are being Hinduized. The fact is, Dalits are Hindus. Dalits are not non-Hindus. A small section may have converted along with Ambedkar, to Buddhism, and a smaller section might have got converted to Christianity, but a majority of Dalits in India, even in 2023, are Hindus. How many people have converted out of Hinduism in Uttar Pradesh? In Maharashtra, barring the Mahar caste to which Dr. Ambedkar belonged, others continue to be Hindu. And I can tell you that if you speak to Matangs, which is the second largest scheduled caste community in Maharashtra, they are proud Hindus. They say that they trace their ancestry to Matang Rishi. So friends, that Hinduization, that, they are not Hindus, but they are being Hinduized. This is a misconception. Now, Azad, I'll make just one last point about Azad. Azad has given himself one new name, Ravan. Chandrasekhar Azad Ravan. How many Dalits have followed suit and called themselves Ravan? Because Ram, historically, is also close to the hearts of millions of Dalits. Look at all the great Dalit leaders, beginning with Ambedkar. His father, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar. Ram Vilas Paswan. Jagjeevan Ram. Ramnath Kovind. काशी राम और रामदास अठौले, सबके नाम में राम है, और कहते हैं कि इनको हिंदुआइज कर रहे हैं. So friends, I conclude by saying that the time has come when we have to reunite the entire nation across all castes, all religious communities, all ethnic communities. We are all Indians first. And that alone will take India forward. Not identity politics either of the BSP kind or the identity politics of today's BJP, that is Hindu politics. No. It has to be politics for all of Indians. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Actually, there's not much time left, but we'll have to take up some questions. So we'll take up 3 questions, and if we can manage more, we can. And the thing is that you have to come up here because we have one camera, and is by the way, it's being carried live on on YouTube. So just come up and no, you'll have to come up here. Don't take the No, because we're carrying the. Just come up here, then he'll carry. Just relax here, relax. You are anyway out of dress also. There's another problem. So, yeah, come. Just come here, come here. Yeah. Can you get him on the camera? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can
yeah,
I
go ahead.
hold this mic?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Good evening, sir. My name is Shaurya. I'm from CPS JNU. So my 2 questions. One is when we talk about fragmentation of the Dalit and they are voting towards BJP in large numbers, is it necessary to assume that a group will only have one homogeneous tendencies? Because a group may have a lot of tendencies in itself, and it may have manifested in the sense of voting for when they saw BJP as an alternative. So why should we assume a group should have only homogeneous tendencies? And the second thing is in your book, ma'am, did you encounter, is there a fear amongst Dalits that if it becomes Hindu Rashtra, as BJP says, it will casteism return in its worst form? Is that also fear amongst Dalits with the ideological propaganda of Hindutva politics?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take the second question. इधर आके बोलिए, come here and yeah. No, remove the mic, take the mic out there, so come here. Yeah.
Sir, with due respect to all of you, here we are talking Dalit and Hindu, but unfortunately we are representing even Dalit itself. Why not to have a representation from Dalit community from here? I think you, Mr. Sajjan Kumar, is also not representing them. Second thing, Mr. Jodhka, I think in Punjab is the only state where the maximum scheduled caste there. And Kashiram contested in one election from Hoshiarpur. Why they are not successful in Punjab, and why they are so successful in UP and other parts of the. Third one question is, why, just small. Why this scheduled caste community or creamy layer, they don't allow reservation for their own people? This way they can help their own community.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take the last one here. Yeah, Saul, come in, quick.
My brief question is, I'm quoting Dr. Ambedkar, 1928, he said, politics in India is nothing but theology in action. That was 1928. So literally, slightly less than 100 years later, we find this politics getting much more anchored in theology, the way things are happening. Now, in such a situation, RSS, Mr. Kulkarni said, they are becoming pro-Dalit or whatever term he used. But RSS chief also said, I think reservations should be abolished. So therefore, politics and theology, politics, if it is anchored in theology, don't you think it is going against Dalits?
I think we'll stop, Borker, like, I've been raising my hand for a long time. No, sir, you are not in your dress today. No, that's okay. No. There are certain issues here. You see,
what others are in dress?
No,
Please.
Yeah. No,
I want to ask something and I've been raising my hand.
No, that's okay.
That's not okay.
Argumentation you can.
Yeah. Come
First about the panel and Dalit question, this is just the first official book launch. We are going to have a series of book launch and JNU and others wherein eminent Dalit intellectuals are there. So this is not important. Second, about the fragmentation part, if we see, look, one question is, one of the crux that we have to understand, that this book tries to normalize the Dalit discourse from the perspective of the ground. It's not an exotic discourse as has been, depicted in academia and analysis. So let's not have a native Orientalism, because whenever we have an academic analytical gaze, there is a tendency to go with the a priori assumption of certain exotic behaviors, be it ideological, be it cultural. That's something fascinating. What we have tried, that on the ground the Dalit are behaving as normally as you find other caste and communities, and therefore this a priori, and that is why I said we are employing a field view which is a epistemic realism, wherein you find that Dalits' aspirations and behavior are at par and coterminous with others. Yeah.
Why in Punjab?
Yeah, I think in some sense it also raises many theoretical questions. Like it was being discussed, we talked about Dalit as a political construct. Scheduled caste likewise is an administrative construct of the modern state. And we tend to turn it into a sui generis category and then raise questions about like, why don't they intermarry? Why are they aware of? Caste is a different reality. I think scheduled caste is an administrative construct of the nation state. Punjab has its own administrative processes. For example, Punjab, Haryana do not have an ST list. And all those who would have been scheduled tribe in some other regions, they have been listed as scheduled caste in Punjab. Likewise, there are communities which have been able to push their way into scheduled caste list. Rai Sikhs, for example, they were OBCs or they should be in ST list. They are not Dalits. They are not untouchables. They have never been treated untouchables. But they're substantial number, 5-6%. They were able to push their way into the SC list. These are also competitive political processes. So I think one should not look at SC as a sui generis substantive political community.
They have to be turned into political community, which Kanshiram was able to do in UP successfully for a short period of time. It can happen in future. But Kanshiram's vision was not of turning scheduled castes into Dalits. His vision was to combining scheduled castes with OBCs, at least lower OBCs. That's why he kept talking about Bahujan. And the idea of Bahujan, it needed lot of conceptual investment from within the movement, which it was not able to do. So Bahujan is not a sectarian category to begin with. So I think there is much more in this discussion, and I think we should kind of take that forward, and we can. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I should also clarify that in the first part of the book, we do deal with the term Dalit. Maybe it's missing because it's in the endnotes. In books of this kind, people don't often read endnotes. We've gone into large number of details about why the term is used, what are the various subcastes, at least in the case of UP. And I mean, this term has been, so the term has been adopted, but it's been done with fairly great caution in the sense that it has been explained. And where BSP was concerned, I think, I don't remember who said it, but I think in the 1990s, the BSP was, at least insofar as voting was concerned, was able to bring these various subcastes together. I think that was the major achievement of the BSP. We are not saying that, they dissolved all their differences and the subcastes came together. The subcastes remained. Now, one, it is unraveling today and going into decline. These subcaste identities are becoming important, and therefore the competition which always existed on the ground, even during the BSP period, though it was muted to some extent, is today become much more important. So therefore, when we're talking about fragmentation, it's along subcaste lines, it's along ideological lines, and it's also along, as Sajjan pointed out, sub-regional lines. And I mean, I'm trying to answer a whole range of, when we use the term Hinduization, we don't mean, perhaps it was not a very appropriate use or the way it was put. We didn't mean that they are going to be made into Hindu, but that, their very specific identity as Dalits was to some extent, I mean, the attempt was made to bring them much more into the Hindu society, because not in this book, but earlier I've done field work where subcastes tell you, hum Hindu nahi hai. This was in the 1990s, mid-1990s, when I wrote my earlier book on the BSP. But yet they would agree they were Hindus, but nahi, hum alag hain. That kind of a thing was there. So when we use the term Hinduization, what we are meaning is a long-term process which has, either through mobilization or through social processes, brought them in far more into the Hindu community. And today, of course, there is a much greater attempt. It's a project largely driven by electoral aspects as such. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what else. Yes, somebody asked, why did Kanshiram come from Punjab to UP? That is because in UP, he recognized that there was a rising assertion, and as Professor Jodhka mentioned, there was, he was able to form the BAMSIF. That is, in UP, there was a group, a post-independence, new generation, somewhat educated, and who had got into government offices, even if it was at the lower level, and who were extremely conscious of their own identity and the fact that although they had become, people who had good jobs and so on, they were still treated badly. So he forms the BAMSIF, and then he forms the BSP. So, yes, that also. So the reason he comes to UP is that he finds that there is assertion. Kanshiram's greatest achievement was not that he created the assertion. There is a long-term process of Ambedkarization that Jagpal Singh has written very well about. What his achievement was that he saw that assertion, was able to harness it, form first the BAMSIF, then the DS4, and then the BSP. So that's why he came to UP. I don't remember if there are any other questions.
No, I think we have to. No, sorry. There's a dress code in the center. We can't. No, I'm sorry. The gentleman, you can't compare yourself with him. I mean, you're a senior member. Why? What dress code have I not? No, you are in shorts. You are in shorts, please. No, please, you cannot come. I don't want to argue this. I don't want to argue. You talk to the president of IIC, okay? Don't talk to me about it. No, please. This is getting beyond. I mean, you come in shorts and you're a senior member. You should know that you're not supposed to come in shorts. No, please.
Was there any other question in the bill?
I'm a very old member of IIC. We cannot, I've been here for 45 years. We've never had anybody in shorts. Please do not break and lay a precedent of wearing shorts and asking a question. Really. I feel insulted.
I think we should...
No, I'm also insulted.
There should be some malice.
Nina, please, let's.
I think we should...
No, this is you. Relax, ma'am. So anyway, this is a kind of a subplot on dress. So let's get out of that. I think we'll conclude the meeting now. I'll just make a short. Yeah. Can you just relax for a few minutes, please? We're just going to close in the next 2 minutes. Okay? Madam, please, now let's just cut it out. Enough. What do you mean wrong? Just cut it out, please. Cut it out. If India, just relax now. If India has to move ahead to a caste-free nation, the need is for an all-embracing, inclusive pan-India social movement of social and cultural transformation. Ambedkar showed the way. Turn in any direction you like. Caste is the monster that crosses your path. You cannot have political reform. You cannot have economic reform unless you kill that monster. In fact, the Dalit political vision today not only encompasses the most oppressed, exploited and marginalized sections of caste system, but also other sections which took on the Brahminical hegemony in 1970s and 80s, the backward castes and Adivasis. The Dalit political vision has now moved beyond the rhetoric of Bahujan Samaj Party and the factions of the Republican Party, and the decorative Dalit politicos in the Congress, BJP, Samajwadi Party, the Janata Dal United et al., and even the low caste based Maoist organizations. New social movements like Seva, the NBA, and the MKSS in Rajasthan and other states have fundamentally broadened the Dalit political vision. And I think this Dalit political vision needs to be broadened further so that we bring in the caste-free nation that we all aim at. Thank you very much for your attention and patience. Thank you.